Hello and welcome to the Impressive Empress podcast, where I have heartfelt conversations with women leaders who are making this world more beautiful and lovable. Together, we explore stories of courage, resilience, authenticity, and a lot more. The power skills that help us rise and lead from the heart, creating meaningful impact in the society. Each episode is an inner journey, a reminder that leadership begins within. I'm your host Malati, and I'm so grateful you're here. Before we dive in, please make sure you follow the show so you never miss an episode. And if you enjoy our conversations, leaving a rating or review helps us reach more inspiring women like you. Now, let's get going together. Today's guest is Wing Commander Jaya Thare, retired but a decorated Indian Air Force veteran. She's a true trailblazer in aviation and space. She has flown over 3,500 hours in the Indian Air Force and been the first woman flight license officer to the Prime Minister of India and is a qualified aircraft accident investigator. She has led corporate aviation operations at Amazon and now leads Neurizon Space, mentoring the next generation of explorers and shaping India's space ecosystem. As the global G100 head and state chair for space technology and aviation in Karnataka, Jaya champions women empowerment and gender equality in these pioneering fields. Her role as an Indian ambassador for the project Shakti Sat reflects her unwavering dedication to inspiring young girls and women and cultivating the next generation of global talent. Jaya's story reminds me of Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam's words: dream, dream, dream. Dreams transform into thoughts, and thoughts result in action. She has lived exactly that, turning dreams into firsts, challenging challenges into opportunities, and vision into action. Somewhere toward the end of this conversation, she's going to share a personal reflection on balancing ambition and life, a moment you won't want to miss. With that, I welcome Jaya. Jaya, namaskaram. Welcome to the Impressive Empress podcast, where we explore not just the accomplishments, but the mindsets, the moments, and the meaning behind them. It is such a joy to have you here today.
Thank you, Namaskar, and thank you for having me here. It is such a privilege to be on this podcast and sharing myself, the authenticity, and everything we have as women.
Thank you. Jay, let's start from the very beginning. As a first generation military aviator, pursuing a dream to catch the skies in a male dominated field must have required enormous courage and self reflection. Can you take us back to the time when you first decided to fly? Was it adventure, service, or something deeper? Did you have a role model? How did you confront the fears and doubts that came with stepping into the unknown?
I think this is a very, very good question. And I keep saying to all the children I'm mentoring right now that the best thing happened to me was a very normal childhood, a very good environment to grow up. Maybe there were not much of exposure at that time as we have it now, but it was like all playing, studying, and being in a very protective environment of your parents, of your teachers, listening to them, being in present. And I don't think that when I was growing up, I was thinking of breaking barriers and having courage to fly and this and that. These are very, very big words, I would say. Now I use it as you know, as a very casual talk, but at that time I was just enjoying my childhood. Yes, but as I look back, the best thing is I have lived my life in phases. It was never a linear thing that at 2 years of age I wanted to fly, at 5 years of age I wanted to fly. In fact, till class 12th I would say that I'm a KB student, and till class 12th I was just doing what was required out of me. I had no big dreams. Yes, many people at that time were, working towards coaching and becoming a doctor, becoming a software engineer. But my flying came into existence much later, I would say. So as a child, It's good. A very balanced environment at house. I think I learned a lot from my mother. She was a national champion in sports when she got married at 19. So, you know, the mother carries a lot of energy and every child contains it. The flow of that mother comes into every child. And that is how I learned the initial lessons of leadership from a woman who had the potential, who had everything, to move forward, but was restricted by the environment, the society. So I would say that leadership in you as a person, as an individual, never dies. Wherever you are, you perform, whether as a mother, whether as a daughter, or anywhere, whether you work or not. See, the definition of work is given by the society. I think every woman who is at home is doing much more than what is required or the definition of work, right? And that too without any pressure of being uh, uh, performance oriented or capability. We give it all what we have to the family, and no work culture can support it, right? What we do at home. So I think the initial lessons of the leadership and everything, how to manage the house well, how to be courageous, how to protect your children, how to nurture them, how to balance everything comes from her. My father was in the Air Force. He was a radiologist. So more than the aircrafts, I have seen hospitals. So we were hopping from one hospital to another in postings. So aircraft came in my life when he left service. That's very rare to think of, but when he left service, we moved to our own house, which was that time, it was not fully furnished, and we just moved. So we had a big terrace, and me and my brother used to play. Our whole the day goes into playing in the terrace. And then we started following the aircrafts which were flying very low on our terrace. And that was the first time I saw that why these aircrafts are so low. They are flying so low. And we used to play a lot of games saying bye bye to pilots and all those things. But still, then I felt I was too less to think of being a pilot. We think pilots or people in the uniform as something very unachievable at that point of time. I used to think that, at least. Everything was just the base of what was going to happen. People, place, everything leading to something which I was destined for. So these games became just saying, waving off to the pilots. These games became how to identify the aircraft. Which aircraft is this? Is this the Indian Air Force aircraft, or it is a civil aircraft? It is a big aircraft or a small aircraft? What type of wings? What type of lights? What type of undercarriage? So everything in a day. This was one whole kind of. We used to say that our terrace is our ATC. So we used to sit there and watch the aircrafts flying. That is how it happened. Because my father was in the Air Force and I was always drawn to the uniform, I joined the Air NCC. So in Air NCC, one day our CEO came and he asked, who wants a joyride? And all of us were like, yeah, I want to, like all curious kids. So I remember that I was the fifth in sequence when he took us to the aircraft. And that time it was Ardra. Ardra is a non-powered aircraft. It was a glider, I would say. Glider is the right word for these kind of aircraft. When they don't have an engine, they fly with the winch and just one circuit and back. That time it was that. So when he asked me to, I was just noticing everything. And when he asked me to come sit here, let's see how you fly. And when I sat in that cockpit, that time I was very clear that this is where I belong. That was a eureka moment, a person who never thought, never seen an aircraft, or right now it's very easy to, most of the kids fly here and there. But that time it was very rare. So that was the moment when I realized that, okay, this is it. This is what I want. And then from there, it started training. The training and everything started. My CEO said that, okay, you have the hang of it. Let's train you. Then he trained me. I came second in the All India Vayu Sainik camp, which is conducted all India. From there, I got a lot of clarity on what I want, how I want, or what I have to do to get it. So this is the whole childhood, or I would say the teenage venture which happened. Teenage was full of a lot of hard work because it was college studies, then NCC, then flying, a lot of things together. But I think that was again, it made the base for Air Force because I was minute to minute, I was in the sequence of doing something great. And that is how I came into Air Force. We have to give a exam which is called Service Selection Board for getting into the military. And the first time I gave when I went to give the SSB, it is a 5 days thing, right? It is not just a written exam. It is a 5 day, continuously 5 days where they are monitoring you for your personal qualities, your personalities, right? So we have a GTO where they will give you a situation and all of you have to solve, where they're testing your capability to think, how you structure a problem, how do you find solutions, how do you work with your team members. These are the GTO parts. The second is about psychology. So again, psychology is something teenage people don't understand, that okay, whatever you ask, I will write. But the instructor sitting there, he's a qualified person who is looking at how you think, what are you writing, how are you writing, what kind of words you are choosing. Everything comes back to the psychology. And the last thing is the interview, where everything kind of, it gives a closure that okay, this person will be selected or not selected. So when I went for the first SSB, I was actually screened out. The screening, what happens is the screening happens when to filter the candidates. So the first step is everyone is sitting and they will give you a topic of discussion and everyone has to discuss something. And the moment he says, okay, this is the topic, everyone jumps into the well. Okay, I have a point, I have a point. And I was looking at them that what's happening. So I got screened out and I was so I would say sad, thinking that, okay, I'm an NCC cadet. I am flying for all these days and they screened me out. But that was a lesson, I would say, that you should never be overconfident. It's better to be underconfident and overperform rather than being overconfident and you don't perform at all. I took my lesson, again, prepared for it, went for Army first. Army May, I got selected. And then I waited for Air Force to open again. I went to Air Force and I again got selected. And that is how I came into from the terrace of my home to the cockpit of Indian Air Force.
That's so beautiful. Like, you had your terrace as the air traffic control or the ATC.
Yes.
And from there, you've captured the skies and beyond. But you mentioned about the selection exam where you had a group discussion and things like that. How many were girls there? How many women were there as a percentage, if you could mention?
So in our batch, there were around 250 to 300 people, and they are separated into groups. So every group has around 30 or less than 30, I would say 25 to 30 people. And there are many other centers. So in our center, it was like 250 to 300 people.
Okay, and how many girls? It was all girls?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, cool. So thanks for persevering to capture the skies. And I know you have flown like 3,500 hours. And in all of this, you have been also trained to land on some of the world's most dangerous runways. I think
Yes.
only a handful of people can actually imagine and actually do it. And I would like to talk to you about your landing at Paro, Bhutan's airport. And I believe it's only 50 pilots have been certified to land there, and you are one of them. It's very dangerous because it is surrounded by about 18,000 feet of
Yes.
Himalayan peaks.
Yes.
And I also read that you have to fly sometimes low altitude and then make sharp 45-degree turns and sometimes, flip the plane to fly like this. Even to read that was kind of so scary. I just imagine myself sitting in an aircraft at that time as a passenger. But can you take us inside that flight? What is going through your mind? how did you find steadiness amidst all of that pressure? And why did you want to take up such a flight?
Such a flight. First of all, thank you for researching out on Paro. So just to simplify for the audience, Paro is one airfield in Bhutan, and it is in a valley. The elevation is around 7,400, 500 feet, and it's a high altitude airfield. And it is surrounded by Himalayan range, around 18,000, as you rightly said. So what happens is in the mountainous terrain, what happens is the weather is very unpredictable. You will see a clear weather, and suddenly within half an hour you will see all the rain clouds or the CB clouds are there. This is one part of the weather, very unpredictable. Second, the airfield has very less of the instrument, like we say ILS, to which helps us to land on a airfield. But Paro is a visual airfield. So you have to kind of keep all the peaks and everything in sight when you go into the valley. There are very, very tight turns which are involved. And yes, the straight in approach, generally pilots stabilize the aircraft when once they are on the straight in approach. All the speeds and everything is in pace to have a smooth landing. But in Paro, again, there is a cliff, small cliff on the short finals. So you just have to take a 45 degrees turn and then come back and then just straighten the aircraft and land. So the margin of error is very, very less. And adding to this, what happens is when you fly at high altitude, your own aircraft behaves a little abnormal. The engines, I would say, air density is less. So it takes some time for them to open into full power, or the lag is there, right? When you do action in the aircraft in the cockpit, and then it takes some time to come into action. So these are the complexity of it. But I would say that it was actually a test of all the pilots who have done these kind of landings. I was around 10 years of service. I have flown into tabletop runways. I have done trial landings. I've done ALGs, like advanced landing grounds. I've been there. So all these things come into our training part. So we keep training and keep going to these kind of airfields to test our ability, our skills. And that is how Paro happened to me. And I would say that Air Force is a very, very forward-looking organization, I would say. So I was chosen by the flight commander and the CEO when they thought that, okay, something like this we have to do. So we were around five of us, five pilots. I was the only lady officer. And we went there. We were trained for 2-3 sorties, and then the last one is a solo where you have to land. The person or the instructor sitting, they actually trust you for life. Believe me. Because in the last sortie, when you are supposed to land and when they are supposed to clear you, they will not say anything. They will not guide you on anything. They will not touch the controls, and they actually trust you for life. And then when we landed, he was like, "Thank you, Jaya. Thank you for landing me safely." So it's fun. But yes, there are lot many things to be taken into account before we do that. It's not a child's game when you just go and land into the airfield. There are n number of hours of training, practice, re-practice. Then there are things can keep changing. When you are supposed to go again, the weather is down, and then you are not going. And when you have to go, then you have to rush up that, okay, weather is clear, the window is there, let's go, let's go, let's go. So there are many things which come into action. But I would say training comes into play every time a pilot does anything like this, because we are trained for following these kind of checklist, repeat all these things together.
Yeah. I mean, in spite of all the training, in critical moments, like you mentioned, the weather could play devil. Anything could happen, right? You could run out of fuel because you're waiting for the right moment or whatever it is. But I think the calm and the focus that you need to bring, that's all thanks to the training. I think it's not just a skill, but a deep trust. Maybe you could call it a brave trust in yourself and your training, I guess. And how many, was it a training landing, or were there also people in your aircraft at the time of?
Yes, the
Right.
people were there in the aircraft, and very beautiful thing happened after that. This that once we were clear to land, and things it took pace. COVID happened, and when COVID happened, everything was inside the house. Everyone was locked inside, but we were still working because the military people were still working. And what kind of followed it, we landed at Paro the next time with COVID vaccines. So we were delivering COVID vaccines to Bhutan, and that is how it ended up. And it was so satisfying, that once you have done this kind of one is like being in that elite group of pilots, and second is what resources you are developing thereafter, right? It was so satisfying to deliver the COVID vaccines for whole of Bhutan. So it was very interesting. And yes, pilots, I would say the sky changes you, not just as a pilot, but as a person, as a personality. We think very differently. We kind of have a very good hold on what we want to show, what not to show, how to structure our thoughts. When everything is in chaos, how do you still persist, still go with the team, still decide? And I'm very fortunate to be one of them.
Amazing, amazing. You have a lot of firsts to your credit. I think we'll come back to it. But as part of a team, I think you have also flown an all-women crew. Talk to me about that experience. These are all high-stakes environment, and sometimes in remote regions, and this requires a lot of technical expertise. Like you mentioned, at such moments, the trainer is not going to say a word. I'm sure the co-pilot is also similar. And how did you realize, or how did you kind of build that trust amongst the crew? This unspoken understanding, is it as critical as the flying skills? And what is the kind of experience you gained in this kind of a crew?
Yeah, so I think I would like to describe it in two parts. One is the all women crew. So in Air Force, the moment we step into the training establishment, they are very clear, and they make it very clear that from here on, you are no man or no women or any other gender. You are just officers in training. And they don't just say it. We live it every day. So there is no different standards for a lady officer or a women officer or a male officer. All are same. We are trained same, and that is how even in the cockpit we never say that all women this and that. It is for the outsiders, I would say. So when there's a flight plan which is made in the squadron, that who will go where, they don't generally see that we are putting two women together or two males together. It's just not the norm. And that is why when three of us went, we were like, it's a normal sortie for us. Though we prepare the same, whatever training procedures are there, whatever briefings are there, we do everything together. And pilots definitely trust their life with each other, because everyone has a responsibility, and when even one gap can lead you all of you to somewhere else. So it's a high stake environment, there's no doubt about it. But when we go as all women crew, or all men, or a mixed crew, it definitely not affect us, because we are same with each other. ALG definitely, it is the I would say, when we went to the ALG, it was a short runway where we have to land. So whatever procedures we did, or whatever the operation was supposed to be done, it was done in the same way as we would do with anyone else. So there was no change in doing something else. We trust the male pilot as we do for a female pilot. So trust in the cockpit is same for everyone. Even everyone in the cockpit is same. The gender doesn't matter. But yes, when we came out, when we landed back, then everyone was like, all women crew. And we were looking at these, okay, ठीक है, we have done it. But yes, all these airfield test your capability, your skills, your trust on each other, and definitely the training comes into place whenever these kind of risky environments you are operating into.
Mhm. But I believe, women are also driven a lot by the hormones. So how does that play in such a high stake environment? How do you, as a woman, how do you manage that?
I think it is taught from the beginning. There are two parts of it. One is the constant. Like if you are born as a female, the constant it, that you will be having these cycles which will affect your hormones and your mental state, your body aches, you need rest, all those things. These are constant, I think, for everyone. The intensity may vary for each individual, but these are the constant. Now, second is how we respond to it. So when I say how we respond to it, military women officers, I would also say that the sports women or women who are very involved in a lot of physical activity, they have a very different mechanism to respond to these changes, I would say, right? So when you are in the academy, you don't ask for leeway that, okay, I'm down or I'm not feeling well today, because you know there's no option. They will still make you run. They don't give any leeway. And I think it is good in a sense because you kind of break your own barriers while doing this. We I have maybe I did run a cross country on the second or third day of this cycle. I was really literally in tears that why am I doing that? Nobody is listening to me in that. But when I completed the cross country, I felt that okay, I can do this also, right? That is the kind of confidence you build on your body that okay, this is also possible. So it's about how you respond to it. I'm sure that if I lie down for all 5 days, I'll go into depression. Whereas if I continue to exercise my mind and my body, maybe the intensity may vary, but we fly on all days. It doesn't matter what kind of month we are, but we fly all days. It doesn't matter that it is a critical environment or not. We still continue to perform on whatever we are trained for. So it's more on training and response to the hormones rather than just going as per your hormones, because the hormones can, anytime override your own thinking.
So it's a question of not just understanding your aircraft or the terrain. I think most important is to understand yourself and your body.
Yes, correct.
I think, and the training is also as important as that.
And
Moving
as
on.
women, I would say that it is very important to understand ourselves. It is very, very important because you are the energy, you are the center of whatever you are doing, whether at home or at work. You are always juggling into things. And when a woman is in that happy hormones, it can be seen in everyone, all members of the family. Your child is happy, your husband is happy, or all the members are happy. So you can feel the energy of a lady at home in every member. And that is why it is very, very important for us to understand ourselves first.
Yes, thanks for pointing that out because we don't realize that the kind of role that a woman plays, not just at work, but at home is very important. Moving on to the kind of challenges that you have taken on. You have investigated aircraft incidents and accidents, something that directly impacts aviation safety. With the growing role of technology, how has AI or advanced analytics changed the way the investigations are conducted? And do you think these tools reveal insights that traditional methods probably might miss? And how would you navigate the balance between human judgment and technology?
I think it's a very good mix of human and technology because technology will evolve. The most vulnerable part anywhere, whether you go to space or you fly or you be on ground, the most vulnerable person will always be a human and not technology. Because you are the one who is handling the technology and it is not other way down. So it's important to work on the human first and then the technology. Technology will evolve on its own pace, but working on the human is important because finally these are just tools, whether it is AI or tech or anything. But we are the person or the captain of the aircraft who is going to handle all these things. These tools should be used as how easy they can make your life, right? We are not into that era when we are running with bows and arrows on elephants and horses, where we need physical strength. We are into an era where your mind has to work properly. So all these tools are there to help you out. They definitely help in the investigation, whether it is a black box, or there are many other things coming on in the newer version of aircrafts, where the accident investigators get a minute to minute recording of what's happened, what has happened in the cockpit, what went wrong, how they can actually connect the dots looking backwards and come to the conclusion. But again, I would say the most vulnerable part is the human. So we need to work on the human. Parallelly, we can work on the tech or whatever tools we are developing, because they are definitely there to make our life easy.
Yeah. I mean, it's really fascinating to see how AI is evolving in many fields. I'm sure it can also help with the safety and decision making. But thanks for pointing out that human experience and judgment still remain irreplaceable, at least as far as aviation is concerned, or the accidents or incidents are concerned. Now, after such high stakes flying and investigative work, you kind of retired from the Indian Air Force and stepped into corporate aviation leadership at Amazon, a very different environment. What brought about the change, and how did you carry forward whatever you had learned at the Air Force into leading large teams, making strategic decisions, and shaping the operations of the in the corporate world?
Yeah. And I think before moving on to what the transition meant to me, it is very important to understand the why I took this decision. Because most of the people were like, you have such a linear path. You go and fly outside, you will get everything in hand, whatever salary you want. You continue to do whatever you are doing, putting all your skills together in a better way. But I think I had enough of flying at that time. I was flying in the NCC, and then I was flying in the Air Force. I have a 5-year-old. I had a 5-year-old daughter that time, and now she's 8. So there are many things which I would say that changed me as a person. I really wanted to explore more on people part of it, because I'm in the pilots fraternity all day long, the engineers and pilots together. We keep on meeting the same people. So I really wanted to know that what the other part of this world is doing on ground. So this is one thing I wanted to see. The second is I really wanted to upgrade myself in tech part, not in the aircraft systems, but on the tech part, like how things happen, how systems are built. And the third part was definitely I was experimenting with myself. I really wanted to know that how I am going to perform in a very different environment. So these are the things running in my mind, and when Amazon happened. And I'm very happy that, Amazon happened, because again, when I joined the company, I read about the leadership principles. And when I read the leadership principles, I felt that, okay, I'm living all these principles still now. I'm just coming onto the corporate with the same kind of qualities they want, or they are living into. So it was easier to translate all my military experience into the corporate, because all the principles, when you say leaders are same everywhere. The environment may be different, the stakes may be different, the consequences may be different, but leadership is same everywhere, and you require the same qualities in a leader to do well or be in the people. So I had a very good experience working in Amazon. Got very good projects where I got the chance to work with freshers and Gen Zs, we call about. It was interesting to learn from them, and they also learned from me. So it was a mutual integration of a lot of good things, where I felt that, okay, I'm here to give a lot of leadership plus direction to them. And they were also looking forward that how we can work together as a team. So it was a good experience, I would say. And then things happened, but I got very good opportunities to go out also. They said that we can go to US, Europe. They are very open about it. But I wanted to stay in India. And by that time, I what I realized was a lot of strengths in myself working in 2.5 to 3 years, whatever strengths I had. Plus, I got to know that, okay, the corporate is not the end result. I'm not going to do this all my life. So I have whatever I have in mind, whatever ideas I have in mind, this is the time to shape them. And that is how I quit and started New Horizon Space, which is again a very organic extension to me from sky to space. So it's interesting journey, I would say, and people like me make it more interesting.
I would definitely want to hear more about the New Horizon Space that you have started. But I would like to also touch upon the kind of qualities. You mentioned that leadership is the same wherever it is. The environments may change, the stakes may be different. But what are the qualities that you think are common, whichever the environment or whatever the sector is, that would be important for a leader, especially as a woman leader?
Yeah, I think many things come together when you talk about a leader. It has to be courageous, whether in air or on ground. We have to take risks, calculated risks. How it is more about how we think and how we build rather than just personal goals. When you transition into leaders, it's more about people, how you are taking the team along. Like in military, we say that your team is as strong as the weakest person in your team, and that is true everywhere, because you have to take all the team along. And I'm very happy that all these military skills translate very well into bigger teams when you work in a global environment, because leadership is same. You have teams, you need to have things in place where you can take your teams along, you can direct them properly, make them understand that what are the risks and why are you taking it, and what is the end result or what are the targets you want to achieve. So all these things come in very well. As a women leader, I would say there are many other skills also come into play. If you say about work environment, we are new to work environment. I would say that the whole work environment was built by men. Now is when the women have started coming into leadership positions. So now things are changing rapidly. But we take into consideration a lot of good things which were missed out, like empathy. I would say empathy is one of the biggest thing which needs to be in a team, and women have a lot of empathy. I would say we are blessed, or it is a natural instinct for us to lead like that. Again, I would say our instincts are very strong. All the women leaders, you will see that they, whether a team member is going to say anything or not, but you can sense it out. You can sense the team's mood, how once you enter the room, you get to know the meeting more than what is said and done. So these are some of the qualities which are very very specific to women, very unique to women. And I don't say that whatever has been done, it is wrong and we are making something new. I think we should top it up, whatever we have learned, because I'm coming from a male dominated society. Whatever you say, from the aircraft, I have learned whatever men have done till now. They are my mentors. They have taught me. They were my instructors. They have shaped and reshaped who I am. So I will not say that everything what was done was wrong and I'm doing something very great. But yes, I really want to carry on my very, very unique qualities, which only women have. And when we sit on the table and discuss, these qualities actually shine the whole meeting, that, okay, we didn't know this part of females can come into the right direction and take this meeting into a whole new direction. So it's interesting.
I mean, it's very inspiring how you could, translate the lessons from the military aviation in terms of risk taking, in terms of courage, or the brave trust, or the tightly knit teamwork into corporate leadership, maintaining integrity and clarity, also with women pitching in with their empathy. And I really like the point about the strong instincts, the intuitions that the feminine energy brings. So I think that's a really unique point that you have mentioned. And you have been breaking barriers with the being the first person in your family to take to the skies, but you became the first woman flight liaison officer to the Prime Minister of India. I think that was kind of very historic. What did it feel like to step into the role, not just the honor, but being the first woman to have such a role, the responsibility? How did you carry it without letting the weight of the expectations overwhelm you?
Okay. Before answering this question, I would say that again, coming back to the Air Force, that Air Force doesn't see us as a women officer or a male officer. It's like officers. So whenever it is told that you go and you go, you don't ask any questions. And this role again came to me like in the same way when my commanding officer said that okay, Jaya, you have to go somewhere for 15 days, and once you go there, you will get to know what is to be done later. I said, okay. And my daughter was around 9 months that time, nine months. And I had my in-laws to take care. So the point I want to bring out is when the females are in the military, it's not just them, it is the whole family is in military. You cannot survive alone, right? Because this culture of taking risks, being 100% dedicated to the nation, it is the reality. And when the reality hits with a child, it the women are like they have to build an ecosystem to survive. You cannot do it alone. And I would say, a lot of gratitude that my family, both sides, my husband's side and my side, they have been throughout my pillar of strength. And that is how, again, this thing happened when I said that, okay, I have to go for 15 days. Nobody kind of asked me anything that how will the child, is going to, she will find you, how are we going to handle it? Nothing. They said, okay, they know it is a part of a duty. They know that when nation calls, we have to go. So a military environment itself gives you a lot of responsibility, a lot of kind of priority. You have to structure it out. It's about priorities. What is your priority right now and later? So when I went, I was told that, okay, you will be the flight licensing officer for the VIPs who will be coming. And then, even then, the names are not revealed. Okay. It is just one day before when you get to know, okay, oh my God, I'm traveling with the Prime Minister of India. And I was like, it's kind of, I generally say one word that, you keep inspiring and be inspired. So it is both for me always, whether it is the Prime Minister of India or anyone else. I always keep learning small things from each one and make it see it as a very unique quality. So when I was flying with him, I got a chance to interact with him, and it was a big moment for me. Whatever I am trained for or whatever I was supposed to do, I was doing just that. I will not say that I've done a big thing. Again, I will say that a big thing is for outsiders, but for us, we were just doing our routine work that I was supposed to go and fly, and we were doing that, right? So, yes, but this experience was great because I learned every day. And that myth of looking at someone on TV and then he's just sitting right in front of you, it is something very humbling, I would say. And this is a rare opportunity which I got to learn a lot of habits, to see him so close, doing things. But I'm very, very inspired by whatever happened in those 15 years, because it is not just one person, but he's the Prime Minister of India, and the way he works, the way he behaves, I was like inspired each and every day.
I mean, listening to you itself, I could feel myself having some goosebump moments. But I mean, I would just like to, understand, what does it mean to be a flight liaison officer to the Prime Minister of India, or to anyone for that matter?
Yes. So what happens is the Air Force undertakes a lot of commitments from going from place A to place B for the VIPs, we call VIPs or VVIPs. So it can be the Rashtrapati, it can be the Prime Minister, it can be a Defense Minister, or anyone who belongs into that category. And the flight licensing officer is the officer who is kind of integrating the entourage of the Prime Minister to the Air Force. Like the pilots are flying, they have some, they have given the timelines, and this is the weather, and this is how we are going to go. But in case of any changes, in case of any risks, the flight licensing officer is the one who will communicate this or to the entourage or whosoever is the primary person. So you are acting as a bridge between the Air Force and the people who are traveling with you. And it's an important duty because the terms used in Air Force are different. What they use is different. So you have to just simplify and tell them that, okay, the earlier time was this, and now we are landing 5 minutes late or early because of 1, 2, 3 reasons. So the pilot or the crew explains it to you, and you go and explains it to them. So it is not, I would say that it's a like full time thing you are doing, but yes, it's important because whenever things change, and every minute matters, right? When we are doing these kind of commitments, every second matters. So it's an important duty for us to keep it stable, keep it structured, and communicate in the same words as it is supposed to be.
Yeah, not mincing words or anything.
Yeah.
So, for those girls or women listening to this podcast and who have aspirations to kind of become the first liaison officer one day, what should they do?
No, I think licensing officer is one of the duties, I would say. Coming into the Air Force as a pilot is definitely something everyone should aspire for. And I keep mentoring a lot of girls and men, both, I would say, all the defense aspirants who think that they should come in and join as a pilot. I think it's my responsibility to tell them in as many sentences that how difficult or how easy it is. Because most of the people dream, but when reality hits, they said, no, no, this is not I wanted. Right? It's very important as a mentor to keep things very simple and straightforward so that anyone who is coming into the defense forces is very clear of their ambition, is very clear on what career they are choosing. Because in defense forces, once you are in, then it is not like, okay, 1 year I'm done, I don't like it and I go back. It is not like that. You have chosen a lifestyle and you have to stay there for some time. So wearing the uniform, it's not everyone's cup of tea, I would say. And especially for the young people, if your motivation is only money, please don't come into defense forces because they require much more of you rather than just what we think outside in the corporate that, okay, 1, 2, 3, a car, a house, this I want. But yes, it needs a lot of character. It needs a lot of passion. It needs a lot of courage to be here, to continue in these kind of environments, to kind of excel in these environments. But yes, people are there to guide you out. And the best part, I would say, coming in the military forces, it's not just your marks, it's your personality. So work on yourself each and every day. And I'm very happy that even people who are not selected but ever prepared for coming into the military forces, they exhibit the same kind of qualities wherever they go. I have a lot of NCC friends who went outside and they're working outside. They are brilliant in wherever they are with the same kind of feeling of, being a patriot, working for the nation, working in teams. They have the same qualities. The only thing is like, I'm fortunate enough to wear the uniform and fly, and they are doing their best at whatever stage they are. So just be true to yourself. Keep working on yourself.
As an NCC cadet myself, I'm really proud to say that I carry those values and I live those values. I
True.
think you also do once a cadet, and once you have those nationalist feelings, I think they are etched in you
They never.
forever. And
True.
it doesn't matter whether you're in a uniform or not, like you rightly mentioned, it's there for good. So I want to talk to you about your experience being an analog astronaut simulating space missions on Earth and to understand the human performance or the crew dynamics. What was it to step into that world? Not really flying, but a simulation, living in isolation, making critical decisions in a controlled simulation. Were there
Yes.
moments when vulnerability, trust, and values were tested in ways you hadn't expected?
Yes. Again, the analog astronaut came as a surprise. We were representing India for the first time in the analog mission, and it was world's biggest analog. And India was participating for the first time when I stepped into it. So before going into what takes to be an analog astronaut, let me explain who are analog astronauts. So one are astronauts who goes into space. Analog astronauts are the people who make it possible. Whatever happens in space has to be tested on ground, has to be researched on ground. So we have a lot of places on Earth which resemble Moon and Mars terrain. So what we do is we set up the habitat, and the habitat is not like just a house. It's like isolated from all the places. It is self-sustaining. It is running on a solar energy. There are many equipments inside to monitor your blood pressure, your all the human factors, how your body is responding to that kind of environment. And these are people who test all the things on ground so that the risk when an astronaut is in space is less. Right? If we go there and test, and then the human life is at risk, and that is what these people do. They perform experiments, they perform research under this controlled environment, very very controlled environment, I would say, where your connection with the outside world is close to nil. You have no phones, nothing. You're just inside a cabin, eating whatever grams is required for your body, doing exactly what is written. Like if we have to sleep at 10:30, you sleep at 10:30. If you have to get up at 7 o'clock, you have to get up at 7 o'clock. So everything is monitored. Everything is laid down for every half an hour. That half an hour this, half an hour that. This is how you stay. This is how you put down the survey. And then there are many experiments which are given for research purposes. So you do you do these activities with your teammates who are again with you during this duration. The analog astronaut can be there for three days. They can go to 20 days. They can be in isolation for 30 days, depending on what is required or what kind of research we are doing. So I went for this analog astronaut where we were three of us, and we had a lot of experiments to do. The interesting part of it is I felt that it was just an organic extension of me, because as pilots, human factors are taught to us. Our psychology is mapped. How we behave in a certain environment is mapped. And these data is very critical to everyone. And while being in the Air Force, during the medicals, every year we have medicals. So all these things are monitored in a very, very progressive way. So you know much more about yourself than anyone else. So how your brain works in compressed environment, or when there is a lot at risk, how are you channelizing your energy, how are you channelizing your thoughts to come to a conclusion, how are you making decisions. So all this comes into a play in air, and again in the isolation. Because in isolation, again, you are doing the same things with your subordinates or people. So team dynamics are same as in air. As I told you, that if three people are in the aircraft sitting in the cockpit, they need the same quality of thinking in a very structured way, uh, communicating in a very structured way. Because in air, you can't just write a paragraph when you are supposed to say only a word, right? So we can do it in on ground, but not in air. And same is with analog astronauts. And when we are doing these kind of critical research, which are contributing to life on Mars and Moon. It is very futuristic, It is very fascinating that these experiments can be done on ground and on Earth in a controlled environment. And these maybe sometime these experiment or the research work is will make life happen on these planets. So it's interesting. But again, staying in isolation is difficult, I would say, because your mind plays a lot with you. The moment you are in the isolation for the 1 or 2 days, you're very happy that, okay, I'm cut off from all the chaos. I don't want this. I don't want that. I'm very happy. But after a few days, again, your mind plays you around. How are you feeling? What are you thinking? What are you missing? But I felt that end of all these things, experiments and human factors, learning whatever I was doing, I came out with lot of gratitude. Lot of gratitude, I would say, that the family I have, the trees, the sunshine, everything is so important. It is so privileged to be on earth. Think of a time when these things will not be available. So we are living a very privileged life. We should continue to take care of these natural resources, natural things which are just given by us in many ways, by the nature, by God. So we should just save them and continue living in a cohesive environment, I would say.
I mean, it's really fascinating to just sit here and listen to you talk about all that happens there. I mean, thank you for articulating it so well. I think communication is a key skill that you would learn, but also in this kind of an analog situation or in a simulation, the human elements of trust and the mental toughness, I think,
Yes,
integrity, all of these are also as critical as the technical skill. And
correct.
I mean, it's really amazing. I mean, when it's only when you don't have something will you be able to appreciate what you really have.
Appreciate that.
And once you come out, the way you explained, looking at the sunshine or the rain or whatever, I would even welcome coronavirus.
True, because
Yeah.
that is the time we realize the real value of what we have. It's a privilege to be on earth and using these facilities given by nature.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, yeah, I think the I want you to touch a little bit more on the mental toughness because today we see a tremendous rise in the suicide incidents and also the depression that people face. Can you maybe, touch upon this human element of mental toughness and why is it important and why is our life so precious?
Yes. No, it's a very, very good question. And let me not talk about mental toughness. Let us call it emotions because everything is like connected. Your body, your mind, everything is connected. The irony of this era is like in an ideal situation, the body needs to work out and the mind has to be at peace. That is the ideal situation, right? Your mind should be at peace and body needs to be healthy to work out. But we are living in an era where it is totally opposite. We are using our mind into n number of things, lot of distractions, lot of thoughts which should not be there, and you are resting your body. And that is why these all things are coming up in a very, very different way we never thought about. Right. And that is why you will see people who work out, people who are aware of their bodies, taking nutritious food, their mental health automatically gets into a space where it should be. So having a good lifestyle, definitely it has to be there. But when I talk about emotional things, I would say that is on a decrease because people like to stay alone most of the time. And that is why this is happening. Our families are getting smaller and smaller. Earlier, there was a big, family, joint family, especially when I talk about Indian families. Where is your child eating? The mother never used to care about because there are so many people who are taking care of the child. But nowadays, and there were like 6, 7 children in the last or beyond that. And now taking care of one child is more difficult than taking care of those 7, right? You will agree with me. And what has changed? The child has not changed. The parents have not changed. What has changed has the family dynamics. And that is why when we say that we are living in a nuclear family, when mother and father both are working, the child is whatever entertainment you give them, whether it is TV, it is from outside. Your interaction, your human interaction, your one-to-one interaction is very, very, very important in any generation. I'm not saying just this generation. It was important then, it is important now, and it will always be important. That one-to-one interaction, the one-to-one energy you can feel from each other. And you see that these social circles still survive just because of that. So my mental toughness is a result, I would say, that you continuously have a nice, you are in that kind of ideal environment when you are taking care of your body, your mind is working well, you have a structured way of thinking. Mental toughness comes from there. Mental toughness is not one skill which you develop just on in one day. It is a process. It is a process which takes you there. So I think all these things together are important. We are social. Humans are always social, and they will always be. So the declining formation of the social circles, the family structure, your ability to communicate your emotions to the other person, all these things together, I would say, is reducing the mental toughness.
Yeah, I mean, thanks for sharing that. We often look at the outside world and we wonder how somebody achieved something, but not really have the courage to sit and understand what it takes to get there. And you also mentioned the importance of having an ecosystem, having a family that helps you. I think all of this, it's not the individual that attains a certain position or a state or a success. I think there are so many people who are helping us along the way, and I'm so glad that at every stage of our conversation, you have shared your gratitude to all of those people. And now at your work at the New Horizon Space, you're now guiding and mentoring thousands of not just girls, but also boys and men and women to take up space studies and to get hands on with the projects. You're also the Indian ambassador for Project ShaktiSat. I would request you to share some details about what it is. I think it would be lovely to hear from you. And
Yes.
What is it that you're doing? Why do we need such projects?
Yes. So very excited to share all that what I'm doing, because it's again a very different phase of my life, I would say. I've lived my life in phases, as I told you, right? So I'm in a very different phase, and I'm in this phase. It's more of purpose rather than personal, because personally, I wanted to be a pilot. I wanted this, that, and things are done. But now, if I'm not kind of sharing my knowledge, whatever I have learned, then I feel that, I'm still restricting myself. And that is how a New Horizon came into place. I wanted to build up the ecosystem. And when we say ecosystem, it is not just education, it is not just opportunities or giving a job. It is about supporting the whole ecosystem where a child sitting in the class can imagine him or her reaching to space, becoming an astronaut, right? It is not just about dreams, but providing the right opportunities to make that dream possible. Hope is good. Like, everyone is hopeful that I will become something. If you don't give the right opportunity at the right time, dreams don't take flight. And that is why we established New Horizon Space, where we are working with the children, the academia. We are also working with the industry, and we are also working with people who never thought they will get that kind of opportunity. So it is very important to give the right opportunity, or kind of create the right opportunity for people who never think are privileged to have, right? So Mission Shakti Sat is one of the examples where we are working with in 108 countries. We are working with 12,000 plus girls, all underprivileged. We are actually training them to make a satellite, the real satellite, which we are going to launch in the moon's orbit. Can you imagine this? This is very fascinating, plus very challenging, and very I would say purpose driven and responsibility driven. These are girls. I'm as the Indian ambassador for this project. I'm working with a lot of NGOs in India, a lot of children who come from very underprivileged backgrounds, girls who have never seen an aircraft, and they are helping us build this satellite. The right kind of exposure, and I see that light in their eyes. All the time. Am I allowed to do that? That is the kind of question they ask, and I said, why not? Why not? Because maybe every generation, when I speak about girls, every generation has been fighting for something, someone. Our and dadis were like fighting for education because the education was a privilege. Our mothers were fighting for opportunities, that okay, we don't have opportunities, we have studied, but what to do about the education when we are just supposed to marry and have children. They raised us that right now we have the opportunity, we have the talent, right? What we are fighting for is the work life. And that is why the ecosystem is very important, because in today's era, any female, I would say, is educated, is talented, they're getting the right opportunity. They are just there. People who get the right ecosystem, or the families who support them, their career just shoots up. They are in the leadership position. But people who don't get the right support at the right time, whatever talented they are not able to do it. And that is the kind of ecosystem we need as a woman, as leaders. We need to build up. It's not just about children. It's about any women who has those kind of dreams and moving forward. So in Horizon, we are doing that. We are supporting the CSR activities for people who are into academia, who are supporting these children in education. We give the hands-on workshops for them. We are working with governments on the government school part of it, where boys and girls both are in our workshop. We are conducting leadership, you know, workshops for them. That anything is possible. It's like a small thing. You just need one person who come and say that everything is possible. Don't worry at all, and that is so important, because when we were children, nobody came to us saying that "बच्चे आप करो हो जाएगा." Nobody was there, right? To guide us through that, these are the pressures and this is how you navigate them. And that is why it is very, very important to have the right mentors, the right people who show you hope, rather than saying that this is the problem, that is the problem. Because once a person is hopeful, they know the pros and cons, they understand the practicality of what they are doing, anything is possible. But they have to be, practical about things and not just dreaming. So that is what we are doing. The Shakti Sat students, I love each one of them because they are so happy and bubbly about, we are working in this space industry. And okay, yes, you are the leaders and we will develop you into it. So interesting to work with them. Then we are working with the analog astronaut ecosystem, where we are not just focused on research, but again, the human factors, how to deal with these kind of changes, your mental, as you said, mental toughness, team dynamics in isolation, to prepare them well for these kind of environments so that we can put some data into practice. So these are the things we are doing, and very proud that we are growing one by one.
Okay. It's really beautiful to hear how guiding the underprivileged children with purpose at this stage of your life is kind of shaping you as a person. And I think it's also a phase of reflection, of self-discovery and trust. And thank you again for the wonderful work that you're doing. Now, when you started, I think your journey was full of firsts, uncharted missions, pioneering leadership roles, and emerging technologies. When you started, you didn't have a roadmap, right? The path wasn't clear. The trust factor, maybe you had a lot of doubt in yourself, in your training, or on the team. What was your compass? I mean, it reminds me of Sir C.V. Raman's words: science is a beautiful gift to humanity, and we should not distort it. So, in your journey uh, in the space, or first in the skies and then now with the space, how have you ensured that exploration, innovation, or leadership remain grounded in responsibility and ethics? In short, how are you living by the values that you have learned?
Yeah, how do you answer this question? I would say that I learned very early in life that I am not God gifted for anything. You have to work it out. When people know that, I think 99% of the people, or everyone, all of us, we feel that, okay, someone is God gifted and they are using that talent and we don't have anything. So it's good to realize that. But how do you put it into action is very important. I think I developed the capability of putting the negatives into action very early in life. All the failures, I never feel that, okay, I failed because of this, I failed because of that. It was a stepping stone. And when I take it like that, okay, I have failed because of one, two, three reasons. Let me work on it, and then I realized that, okay, this failure happened because I need to learn these one, two, three things. And every phase gives you that kind of challenge. All of us have our own challenges. We are fighting our own wars in different ways. But the thing, I think, the compass is to stay calm when these failures happen. Use these failures as stepping stones and not get demoralized that, okay, this has not happened, that, because of n number of reason, or I am not good enough. Everyone has that insecurity. Everyone has that kind of self-doubt. But having a self-doubt is good because it kind of pushes you to work hard. Every time you doubt yourself, you in the air also, every time you doubt something, you take out the checklist and refer it once more. And that is how we build. Every time you feel that I'm not good enough, you write it down, that why I'm feeling that. And that is where knowing yourselves come into place, right? That these are my strengths. I can do less work on them. I can still survive. But these are the things which I really need to work on and keep working on them. Because these are the things, your personality traits, which make you unique. If you are just copy pasting anyone, I would say that unique you will be lost in the road to success, or wherever you reach, you will feel that, okay, this is not who I am. So it's very important to carry that who I am while learning from your failures, and while staying calm and composed and taking everyone along towards your success path. Because what is success? I would say success for me is like integration of things. Like, if I'm doing 100% to my work, I'm not able to take on my family, it's not success. It's not growth, I would say. And in a money driven environment, I would say, if your growth is translating into your family, into your health, into your mental health, I would say, all these things combined make you successful. So the compass is fourfold, I would say, that your growth should translate into your family, into your ecosystem, and what you're giving back while taking care of yourself. Maybe it's a big sentence, but interesting.
Absolutely. I mean, this is a very strong lesson on life, I would say, that resonates far beyond aviation. And I think a compass that everyone can adapt and adopt. Were you intentional when you moved from one phase of your life to the other? Did
Uh,
it just, did you
um,
go with the flow, as they say?
I think two things which continue parallelly whenever I think in decision making. One is I'm very very intuitive. I could sense that, okay, this place is not suiting me, or this work is not suiting me, or I need a change. And I always am open to change. I don't see change. Like, there are many people who have that fear of change now. And now everything is changing, and I have to they get very cautious. I'm very open to change. And when I say I'm open to change, a lot of things come into place, that you sense your environment, you sense your people, you sense your work, that, okay, this is it. Because coming back, saying that I don't want to fly anymore, it was a big big thing for me. But I'm happy because I have zero regrets about it. There are many people who said that you're not doing the right thing or right, and now I feel there's no right or wrong for your career or your choices. It is your choices. It is how you carry your choices along with you yourself or for your family. So I think it is this is what makes me who I am, and intuition and plus calculated risks. Yes, I take risky decisions, but yes, I also went with the flow when things were happening, because there are phases in your life when things happen without your control. You can't control anything. So it is very important to keep all these three things in mind. One is when things are going at its own pace and you don't have any control, so just leave yourself. Try whatever you can control. Otherwise, go with the flow. Second is taking calculated risks. When the change is happening, take on those risks. Calculate yourself that how this is going to be for me or my family. And when I say my family, I'm only considered about my inner circle, the inner circle which I always want to travel with me. So whether my decision is affecting them, their family, their life or behavior, that is important for me. And if I feel that okay, some of my decision are adversely going, not in their favor, then I don't take it. And the third is definitely intuition, which goes into that direction, that okay, let's do it, we'll see what happens.
Cool, cool. And my previous podcast was with an intuition expert.
Okay.
So yeah, it's amazing. I mean, like you rightly mentioned, women have a lot of intuitive instincts, so to say. Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. And we should believe in that.
Absolutely. It takes a while to get into the rhythm of it, but yeah,
Yes.
it's really a very helpful skill to have. Finally, I would like to talk about the legacy, or when people look at you, at your life, your achievements, your breakthroughs, your missions, what do you want them to see? What do you hope your legacy inspires in the next generation, not just as an aviator or a space leader, but as a person who has navigated challenges, built trust, and most importantly, has stayed grounded in values?
So I think I have two, I would say, aims or for on the legacy part of it. One is personal and one is for the society. So for the society, I really want to be known as something who built some platforms. I don't want to be known as Jaya. I want to be known as what Jaya has built. So that is the legacy I'm working on. After some time, nobody remembers you. Nothing, no pressure on that. But definitely, whatever years of life I have, I would love to build platforms for people. I want to build more than myself, just what, my domain. I want to expand it to people where they can project their own work, not just as mine, but the platform I want to provide where they can showcase their own work, their own creativity. So I want to be known as something from my work and not just by name. So this is I'm working on. And definitely there's no destination, but I'm enjoying my journey. And the second one is very personal. I would say that when I am 90 or 100, whatever years I live, my major goal is when I look back, I should smile at myself and say I did well. And that is the energy I put into every day, to think about that old lady who will look at me and say ki, no Jaya, you faltered this time, you just rested for this time, and because of this I'm not able to say that you did 100%, so you do well.
Wow, that is really very powerful. I'm sure your 90-year-old you is going to feel very proud of you, of what you're doing and what you have done and what you're going to do. Jaya, this is a wonderful conversation, and I would like to, uh, end this with some rapid fire questions.
My
Are you
God.
ready? Short and
Yes.
sweet answers. One morning ritual or habit you never skip, no matter how busy you are.
I like to have my tea in an open place. So if I am in the office, I go to the window. If I am at home, I go to the garden, and I have my own time. Just looking at the grass and flowers and this and that. So that is something I really love to do alone.
Beautiful. Beautiful. One book or author that has shaped your perspective on leadership or life.
I think there are many. I would say, as I said, that I learn a little from a lot of people. So it is not just one book, but many who have shaped. And I'm very happy to announce that I am writing a book, and very soon it will be published. This is about the Daughters of the Blue Sky. And very excited to put all my experience, whatever I have learned in the Air Force, and with these women, the real authenticity of leadership which comes into place. I think this book is going to inspire a lot of people, not just women, but everyone to become something who they never thought they would become. So it's very important then when you grow out of your own imagination and outperform your own expectations. So this book is all about that, and I'm very happy that writing, putting it into words. This is something from the skies to the ground and to the leadership, I would say.
Wonderful. The title itself is very aspirational and inspirational. Do let me know when it is out. I would definitely
Yes.
like to pick it up. Yeah. So, who was your role model growing up? Like, who inspired your courage to pursue aviation?
I don't think I had a role model because till the time I came into the Air Force, I never saw any lady pilot or any person in my family who I could see that this is something I want to become. So my life has been very, very action led. And again, I would say that at home, I think my mother was one where I learned a lot in every situation, from becoming a mother to becoming my friend and being the mentor all throughout. Then, when I came into the Air Force, there were n number of mentors, I would say, n number of people whom I looked forward to, because the Air Force is a kind of community of very, very intelligent, smart people, very closely knit family, I would say. So there are many people, and the rest, whomsoever I meet, I keep on taking. I will take it from you also. Something.
Thank you. Thank you. So, your favorite place in the sky, either a flight route or an airfield that has left a lasting impression?
Yes, I have landed into many, many beautiful places, but there's one place I felt like it was like out of the world experience was Agati, I would say, Lakshadweep. It's a
Shraddha.
very, very beautiful place. Very, very beautiful runway to land because it's a
Mhm.
small island, and there's just one strip in middle of the island, and both sides you see that turquoise water, turquoise green and blue water with white sand, and that kind of image stayed with me when I was landing. I was so engrossed in looking at how beautiful this place is. Very, very beautiful place. So everyone should go once. But as a pilot, definitely we get the best views.
Absolutely. Yeah, the view from the cockpit, yes. So, a lesson from failure that you still carry with you?
Lesson from failure. I think it's very important to stay who you are. It's very important to have the right people when you fail. It's very important to have the right advices when you fail,
Mm.
because that is the time when you are very vulnerable. You are looking for answers, and you should always have these people around you who whom you can trust in any times, whether you are successful or not successful, and especially the family members. I would say that these are the people who will always stay with you wherever you are. So failures teach you a lot. Failures come to teach you. There's no doubt about it. So take it well. Take the right advices, take the right decisions. I would say right decisions. I will not say right decisions because decisions can be wrong and right. But yes, with all your power, all your authenticity, whatever you have learned, take decisions and move forward. You should have that courage to move forward, because nothing stops. When you look back, you will feel that this failure was just one step, and in the whole journey. And there will always be people who will see you in different phases. They will always have different views about it. And when you are not performing at your best, there will be some people who will always underestimate you. When you are at best, there will be some people who always overestimate you. But you continue doing what you are doing.
Personal mantra or a quote that keeps you grounded in high pressure moments?
I think endurance over enthusiasm.
Okay. A simple pleasure or joy you indulge in after a long mission or a work day?
Spending time with my daughter.
Okay.
She keeps me grounded.
Okay.
Because once you come back from a very, very critical mission, and then she says, Mama, see how nicely I drew this girl today. And you're like, yes, let's do it. And
Yeah.
we enjoy doing mandala art together when you don't have anything to do. I just sit
Mhm.
and do play with colors. It's nice to be grounded with children.
Lovely. And one word or phrase that describes or defines your leadership style?
This is something I have to think about because my leadership is evolving with every phase.
Okay.
So the leaders need to evolve.
Yeah. So the definitions also change probably.
Yes.
Okay. Great. Lovely. That was really lovely, Jaya. Thank you for taking us from the cockpit to the cosmos and into the quiet and powerful spaces of the vulnerability, the courage, trust, and integrity. And to our listeners, you may feel uncertain, but the courage and values and the trust that you place in yourself and others will carry you to your heights you can't yet imagine. So, if this episode inspired you, share it with someone who needs a reminder that their dreams, however unconventional, are valid and worth pursuing. This is the Impressive Empress podcast, celebrating women who rise, lead, and explore beyond the limits. Thank you, Jaya, so much for taking this time and talking to us about all your inner journey, all the values, all the skills that you have acquired and put them to use, and now guiding and mentoring others to become the better uh, person. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me here. It was a lovely, lovely chat, I would say. Thank you for all the listeners. And I hope you take a little from whatever we spoke about. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Jaya. That was really amazing. Thank you for joining us today on the Impressive Empress podcast. If this conversation inspired you, share it with another woman who's ready to lead with purpose. And please follow the show and leave a rating and review. It really helps us reach more women leaders. You can also connect with us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn for more empowering stories and insights. Until the next time, stay curious, stay courageous, and keep creating impact.